Let's get started today. I see we have a huge turnout. Appreciate everyone coming. I know it's right before Thanksgiving, so usually it's the least turnout of the year. Wanted to make sure y'all know when the final is. It's going to be Friday, December 4th, so a week from Friday, from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. in here. And it's going to be over scripting languages, but we'll also have a problem on B+ trees. Okay, I'll repeat that. It's going to have a B+ tree problem on the final. The final, because of the size of the class, will be primarily like the midterm, which is mostly multiple choice, multiple answer with a couple of programs in Perl, PHP, or JavaScript, short programs. And you will not be able to use a cheat sheet. So I'm not going to be testing you over arcane stuff. Okay, it's going to be stuff that should be pretty much clear to you. So in fact, I'll go further and tell you that for the problems, it will be Perl problems. You'll be writing Perl scripts. So focus your memorization for the Perl scripts. I may even give out a short cheat sheet with the necessary syntax so that at least you have that for the Perl problems. But there won't be many of them because it just takes too long to grade everything. So, questions about the final? Okay. And I will have a sample exam up probably tomorrow. It's not guaranteed to exactly be like this exam simply because in the past I've been able to give more problem-oriented exams, but at least it gives you an idea of the type of questions I ask. And make sure you review the quizzes because the quizzes are a really good indicator of the kinds of questions that I would ask on the final. So those quizzes are a really good review. Okay, so today we are going to look at JavaScript Forms. So we're going to look at, one second. I have to recalibrate. Okay, so today we are going to cover JavaScript events, JavaScript regular expressions, possibly we will start Ajax. Depends on the amount of time we have. And then in the last 15 minutes, I want you to fill out a survey with the new EECS website that we are hoping to bring online sometime in the next couple weeks, and which your input would be quite valuable for. So last time we kind of talked about how you use events to handle changes to to web pages. So basically, the user interacts with some form element. So what happens is the user you have a form element, let's say a radio button. Okay, it generates an event. Okay, that calls a JavaScript function that I'll abbreviate as JS. The JavaScript function modifies what? How does it modify the web page? What's the DOM? So it modifies the HTML DOM object. and the browser updates the web page. So we showed you this process last time. This time we're going to be talking about the events that get generated and that are associated with each form element, so the important events. We're going to talk about some of the properties that are associated with form elements that are useful, and we're going to talk about how you can validate your input that comes in from forms using regular expressions. Okay, so start with a construct that you have not yet seen. It's the with statement. And it was introduced because oftentimes when you want to deal with a form, you are going to be dealing with all the form elements. Like you might have a form that's an address, okay? And it has, let's say, a street and a city and a state and a zip code. And you're going to want to access those elements. And let's say the form's name was address. So you could end up having to do a lot of things like, say, document. And remember that every form, you can access it directly using its name attribute. So here, its name attribute is address. And then you could access the individual form elements. But that's writing out a lot of stuff. So they quickly realized that that's a pain in the neck. They gave you a way to set up a temporary namespace by putting a form object into, well, any object, in fact, can be put into the with statement. And now you can simply access all key value pairs that are in that object. So the with statement allows you to access to all, I'll call them property value pairs. Without, which I'm abbreviating WO, having to fully qualify the object name. So here, you could simply now say, I'm just going to do some prints. Say print or echo. Let's say alert. Alert street.value. Alert city.value. Etc. So within the with statement, the property value pairs for that object are all accessible without fully qualifying them. Now, any variable that you create within this with document, like if I said, let's say I said tax equals something times something, tax would only be defined within the scope of the with and would go out of scope outside the with. So that's one thing to be careful about. And it's a little inconsistent because in functions, when you define a variable, it's placed in the global namespace. But if you define a new variable inside a with statement, it's only defined within the with statement and goes out of scope. If you declared var tax outside of it, then you would be fine. Then the value of tax would continue to be available outside the with statement. So just something to be familiar with because it can save a little bit of code writing. Okay, so when a lot of today's lectures devoted it to validation of your form elements, and when you validate form elements, you typically want to provide some feedback if the user messed it up. So for example, you might want to highlight errors in a form. Okay, so I guess I'm coming up with why you might want to dynamically change properties of form elements. Okay, so you might want to highlight errors in a form. You might want to fill in form elements. So a common thing that's done is to fill in form elements from an address book. So you may notice that sometimes when you do something, you actually get a query, or am I allowed to use the address book? And that's the browser asking for permission to access the address book so that it can simplify your life. Right, so how many of you have actually had that experience where it's actually asked you if you want to fill in some form elements and it does it for you? Only you? Haven't? Okay, many of you have. So that's a thing that's commonly done. Okay, and then you may want to enable or disable form elements. So for example, if you have a print box and the print box is, say, 2 radio buttons. So print, and it might be all or range. And for the range, it might be a from and a to. And if all is selected, then you might want these 2 text boxes to be disabled. And then when you click range, so if you click range, okay, then you would enable the text boxes. And I believe that you're doing something like that on the homework assignment. So this is a fairly common thing that you might want to be able to do. Okay, same thing if you have something for an invoice and before you can compute, say, the tax, you would have to have input both a sales tax and a total. And until you've done both, you might disable the button that computes the tax. Okay, so what are some of the interesting properties? Actually, I want to do that first. Yes. Okay, so interesting properties. Of form elements. Okay, the style property. Anyone remember what that does? What that style property is? I know we only hit it briefly. It's a pointer, yep, it's a pointer to a style object. And it allows, okay, which contains properties that were set from a CSS style sheet. Now, even if you did not provide a CSS style sheet, every web browser has its own CSS style sheet that it uses as a default style sheet to render your web page. So there is a CSS style sheet lurking in the background everywhere. And you can use this style object to modify these properties. So for example, you might say style.color equals, say, red, and that would change the text color. And there are many, many other properties you can change. The notes has a link to a good page that shows you the different properties that you can set. So frequently you'll change background colors, you'll change the text color, you may change the font to indicate an error of some kind. Okay. Second important thing is the disabled property. And when it's true, the element is disabled. When it is false, it's enabled. So disables when true, it disables the form element. Okay, and I have an example. Okay, so in this case, I am not going to, it's a little hard to see, but, it's also cut off, sorry. So on my computer, there's no cutoff, so if stuff is getting cut off, please let me know. There's about ½ an inch that it appears is getting cut off. So when I'm writing in the notebook, if it gets cut off, please tell me. So right here, it's a little hard to tell, but I can't click an email. After I hit Brad, I still can't do email. But now when I enter Vanderzanden, now you'll see that the email became enabled, and now I can enter my email address. Okay? And if we look at the page source for that, okay, you can see at the top I have a function set email. I'm using this with statement, and I'm saying if the first name's value length is greater than 0 and the last name's value length is greater than 0, then I set the disabled property to false for email. Otherwise, I set its disabled property to true. And you'll notice when I set up the email, I set its disabled property to true. So it starts up as a disabled element. And then you'll see that when I edit the first name and I edit the last name, in both cases I call set email to check to see whether I need to enable the email form element. So that is a useful one. Then a third one is the title attribute. It's a lot like a rollover box. So when you set the title, it sets, so when the user hovers over the form element with the mouse, it will pop up a little box explaining some information about it, like what the error is or what information is desired. So it's like a rollover. So when the user hovers over the form element, the browser pops up a box a text box with the title string. Okay, so let's go to this one again, and it's in my notes enable.html, so let's go to that. Okay, and I'm going to, just for first name, actually for email, I'm going to say title equals this element, I'm going to say email only is enabled after you enter a first and last name. Okay, so now if we reload that, always remember after making changes to reload, and you can see it says email only is enabled after you enter a first and last name. Maybe if you have really good eyesight, but trust me, that's what it says. And then I roll out, come back in, hover, it shows it. So now it's disabled. In fact, and there it goes. So I'm not sure why it's disabled, but now the rollover tells me, oh, it's only enabled after you enter a first and last name. So that's a useful message at this point because someone might be baffled as to why it is disabled, and they may not know what they have to do in order to get it to be enabled. Okay, and then a final one is this one I'm going to have to check, so just give me one moment. So number 4 is visibility. Okay, visible means if you set it to visible, the form element is visible. This is also useful for non-form elements. Like that's how in Code Assessor I make my error messages appear, as I set this particular one. So hidden form element is invisible. So those are the 4 really useful ones that I think you should know. There certainly are other ones as you get deeper into it, but these 4 give you plenty of ways to highlight stuff in the document, to change things and the like. So stick with these 4 and you'll be in good shape. Okay, so last time we also started talking about events. And there are certain events that are useful and certain events that are not useful. Okay, so first of all, in the GUI community, they typically distinguish between 2 types of events called input events and action events. So input events come from input devices. So we call them often raw, so I'll say raw events that come from input devices. Like mice and keyboards. Or fingers. And then action events are what are called synthesized events. So synthesized events are coming from form elements, and they're pieces of information that are computed as a result of user interaction with that form element. So, okay, that occur as a result of an interaction with a form element. Okay, and usually
they carry some computed information. So examples of that are the Unchanged event for text boxes and for menus. So in that case, the information that's carried is for a text object, the new text. For a menu, simply that a selection has occurred. And then for radio buttons, checkboxes, and buttons, you have the OnClick, which indicates whether the item has been selected or deselected. In contrast, a couple example input events would be things like mouse down or key pressed, actually on mouse down or on key press. And that just gives you raw information about the event. It's much more common to deal with action events than it is to deal with input events. Typically, the form element deals with the input event. It converts it into some information that you find meaningful, and so you typically are going to deal with an action event. And, in fact, we're going to talk about what are the most useful ones. I gave you a laundry list in the notes, but there are a few that are particularly useful. So OnLoad, and then there's another one that is, let's see, OnUnload. Okay, these two are called when a page is loaded or unloaded. Okay, and in the case of the loaded, it's after the page loads, but before the user sees anything. So this is a good time to attach functions to events. So often with unload, this is when you attach functions to events. Remember I said that it's in real commercial systems, it's unusual in the page source to attach the functions to events. It's usually done once the page source is loaded, and it's usually done as part of the onload event. So you would have a function. So basically, in the header for the page, you would see a script source equals, say, foo.js. And then there would be inside of foo, so in foo.js, there would be, say, a function initialize page. Of course, I can't spell initio. Yeah, this is so bad. So initialize page. And then you might see things like document dot, let's say, address dot, say, street dot onChange equals some function like handle street. And then, of course, there'd be another function here in foo.js that is handle street. then up here in the document, in the body tag, you would have OnLoad equals initialize page. So the page gets loaded, the DOM object gets created. Now the initialized page, so as part of the loading, this head information is read. The source file foo.js is loaded. And now when the onload event is generated, it calls initialize page. Initialize page gets called and it sets up the various event handlers, or attaches the various event handlers to events and to form of objects. So this is how you typically are going to handle the association of event handlers with form elements in a real commercial system, is using the onload event. And the onload event is associated with the body tag. So the onload is called when you leave the web page. So called when you leave the web page. So you know how sometimes you get the annoying pop-up box, are you really sure you want to leave, as you try to get out of some advertisement? This happens to me. It really ticks me off. It's like, yes, I hit it accidentally, so I didn't want to be in this advertisement in the first place, and now I really can't wait to get out, and I really don't want to answer this alert box asking me if I really want to leave. Now, the National Park Service actually does it too. I'm a big hiker, so I'm often going there and trying to get information. And if the National Park Service has lodging information, the National Park Service actually contracts that out to companies like Aramark. So you'll click on the lodging link, and the National Park Service page will pop up an alert saying, you know, warning, you're now leaving the National Park Service page, you're going to, say, Aramark. And they're doing that to protect themselves and you, just so that you know that the page you land on isn't the National Park Service. Don't get mad at them for like the lack of lodging, or like get mad at Aramark. So, but at any rate, they're using the on-unload event to do that. Okay, so both of those two events are associated with the body tag. Okay, and the body tag is what encloses your content. The HTML document consists of two parts, a header and a body. Okay, so imagine you could have a footer too, although I'm not 100% sure. Okay, so then associated with, the next useful one is OnClick, which I already told you is associated with radio buttons and checkboxes and buttons. So buttons are the square-shaped things that you see. You see a square-shaped thing, that's a button. And also with, what are they called? Choice items in the menu. Look quickly. Option items. Menu option items. Okay, so each of these four form elements generates an on-click event when you click down the mouse and release. And it doesn't, so we'll talk in a moment about the event information. Basically, the important thing you get is a pointer to the form element that caused the event. So you could say something like OnClick equals, say, foo this. And what that's going to do is call foo, passing a pointer to the form element that generated the click. Okay, now there's also a second parameter that you can pass called event, and that's what they're named. So these two things are specifically named variables, browser generated names, or arguments, browser generated names. The problem is the event object, which contains information about the event, is browser dependent. Which is too bad because it makes it fairly unreliable to use the event object. You simply have to then keep up with each new release of each browser that you wish to support. You can often, most browsers minimally will give you back, will provide button and key information. So which button was clicked, left, right, middle, which key was clicked, like an A key or a B key. But you have to go in and find out for each browser what the properties are for the event that contain that information. So it's somewhat not particularly useful to have the event, whereas having this is quite useful. It allows you to determine what was selected. Okay, so the OnClick is typically the event that you're going to use with those four objects. Then there's an OnChange event that is associated with menus and with text boxes of all ilks. So text area, password protected, any kind of text form element. And this indicates that the object is losing focus and the value has changed. So for a text box, it means that the text value has changed. For a menu, it means the selection has changed. Now, unfortunately, the OnChange doesn't really give you information about which menu item has changed. So with a menu, you typically, with a menu, if you want to know which menu item was selected, you typically place a event handler or event handling function on each option element for the menu. That handles the OnClick. Event. So unfortunately, OnChange isn't super useful for a menu. Tells you that something changed. It can be difficult to figure out what changed. So it's better to just put an OnClick event on each of the menu's option items, and then you will know which item changed. It's particularly necessary when it's a multi-selection menu, because then there's multiple items that can be selected, and you won't know which one was selected or deselected. Okay. Also with text boxes, you sometimes use onKeyPress. This is a fairly unusual use of what kind of event? What is onKeyPress? Action or input? Input. It's actually an input event. Okay, so this is one of the few times you use it, but you sometimes notice, like if you're entering your social security number, have you ever noticed you enter it and then it pops to another box? That's what they're doing, they're counting key presses. Or if you're doing it for a date, you may be entering a month and after you enter 2 digits, it pops to the day, and after you enter 2 digits, it pops to the year. What it's doing is it's counting key presses. So it's useful for counting key presses and changing focus to the next text box when the current text box is complete or full. Okay, so it says useful for counting key presses and changing focus to the next text box when the current text box is full. How do we change the focus? You do it by saying, you call a method called focus. So there is on text boxes, there is a focus method. That gives the focus to that text box. So that's a handy method that you can call when you need to transfer the focus from one text box to another text box without making the user hit the tab key. So, yes?
Is this the same thing that would happen with like pressing enter on a form?
Yes. If you hit enter on a form, what often happens is it tries to submit the entire form, which is not good. So yes, so tab, this is my experience. So tab, okay, transfers focus to next form element. It doesn't have to be a text box. It could be a button, okay? Next form element. And remember, you can set the tab order. But enter tries to submit the form. Prematurely. It annoys me no end, okay? Usually what I do is, we'll get to it but there's a way that you can disable the submit method for a form just because enter is so pernicious. Okay, because you're right, usually enter, you just hit it and you mean for it to terminate that particular text box, but you don't want the form submitted. But that's not how most browsers take it. They try to submit the form. Okay, let's see. So, wow, now I'm cut off as well. Okay, so on key press, then there is an on focus, and that's useful usually for text boxes. So when the object gains the focus, useful or triggered when object gains focus. Okay, can be used to select text. Via the text box select method. So if you call select, it will select all the text in a text box. But unfortunately, you can't control how much gets selected. The entire string gets selected. So it's not as handy as you might like. But if you are in the middle of doing a social security number or something, it may be helpful when the focus changes. If it gets selected, it's nice feedback that, hey, you're entering the next part of the social security number. Okay. Other questions about that? Okay. So we get there we go. Okay, so the last two really useful ones are OnSubmit and OnReset. So submit tries to submit this event tries to submit the form to the server. Okay, this is where you often check to make sure that they filled out all the forms they're supposed to fill out, and if they don't, you want to pop up some error messages. So typically, this is where you say proofread the form to make sure all form elements, all required form elements are completed. So all required form elements. Okay, and you return false. So return false to stop transmission to the server. And true to proceed. Okay, so like I said, the problem is that the enter key tends to do the OnSubmit. So to prove that to you, let's go back to this form and do an OnSubmit. And instead of doing this, well, I'm going to return false, but first I'm going to say alert, I was called. Okay, so when the OnSubmit is called, it says I was called so that you know that that happened. Going back here and reloading, going to enter Brad, hit enter, whoops, ooh, nice, it no longer does it. Hey, they fixed it. Oh, that's beautiful. Okay. Well, I have to eat my words. Looks like submit, enter is no longer, it's not transferring the focus, but it also doesn't appear to be, actually, just a sec, make sure that's true. The web console. Yeah, excellent. Let's add a OnSubmit then. So let's add a submit button. Button. Type equals submit. And reload this puppy. Aw, come on. Got to give it a value. Value equals submit. No. Try this. Why isn't this working? There we go. Okay, submit. Ah, it didn't pop it up either. Why didn't it call my submit method? Ah, does anyone know why my OnSubmit method wasn't called? Because this might bite you too. It's case sensitive. Ah, OnSubmit. How annoying. It didn't used to be case sensitive because this used to work once upon a time. Okay, now we do submit. Still not doing it? And syntax error, expected expression got end of script.
Do you need to escape the quotation marks?
Oh, I probably do. I certainly do. Thank you. Okay. One more time. There we go. I was called. Yeah, now we're going to see. Ah, it didn't fix it. There we go. See the problem with enter? Hit enter. Boom! I was called. So they didn't fix it after all. How annoying. Okay, so what I always do to fix that problem is, because it's so easy to hit the enter, is I just change the OnSubmit to be a return false. Then, to create a submit button, I don't make it be a submit button. I change it instead to just be a normal button. And then there is a way. OnClick equals, I believe, you just call submit. I have to check that. But there is some function you can call to force submission. And so that's what I do. And that stops the superfluous messages from coming up when we hit enter. So now, having changed this back to return false, and I'll put my alert back in there. Actually, I won't. I didn't reload the page. Okay. Hit it, and nothing is happening. But if I hit submit now, that, as long as I called the right submit function, is something I have to check. But that would do the act of submitting it to the server. So that's how I fix the problem with enter. I'm sure there's another way to do it. I just have never bothered to look for another way to stop enter from causing submission to occur. Okay, so questions about that. And then there was one other one, reset, which resets. So reset event tries to return or tries to revert form elements to their default values. Okay, this function, so if you want to do anything, if you want to stop it, stop this behavior, stop or modify this behavior, then you set this event on a button whose type is reset. So if a button has a type of reset, then when it's clicked, it will generate a reset event. Just like if a button has a type of submit, when you hit it, it will generate a submit event. Okay, so the last part, I've pretty much gone over the useful properties and useful events for each of the different form elements. You can go through my notes and see other things I said. The only other thing I'm going to tell you is that for radio buttons, checkboxes, buttons, there is a click method which simulates a click, mouse click, on that form element. And it is the way that you want to change the value of one of those three form elements. So radio buttons and checkboxes have a property called checked. Okay, so when true, feedback appears. Indicating this button is selected. However, it does not, if it's a radio button, let's say you have a radio button, red, green, blue. And let's say that red is highlighted. And you set blue dot checked to be equal to true. What happens is the browser does make blue be checked, but it doesn't uncheck red, which is bad because radio buttons are supposed to be mutually exclusive. So if you really want to select blue, what you do is you say blue.click. And that will both select blue and deselect red, so that red is no longer selected. So this is right, and that is wrong. You don't want to assign values to the checked field. You can check the check field to see whether, you can read its property to see whether it's true or false to determine if the radio button is selected or not. But if you want to change the selection status, you use the click function. You don't go and check or assign true to the checkbox directly. Same thing with checkboxes. It's better to use the click function to select and deselect if you're going to do it programmatically. Okay? Questions about any of that? Okay. So regular expressions are very simple, fortunately, in Java. Okay, so if you want to create a regular expression, then you just say, you put it in between those slashes without any quotes or anything. So I could say A equals, say, \D 5. And that's going to check for a zip code. So that creates a regular expression object. Then, if I want to test a string, I would say, let's say I made this zip code. Then I could say zip code dot test some string, and that will return true false depending on whether the string matches the zip code. Remember, when you're doing form validation, it's important to put those two characters there. Does anyone remember why that's important? I'm hearing it. Why? Pardon? Yes, so it's not, the problem is you want it to be exactly that width, and that you want it to be exactly 5 characters that are numeric. You don't want it to be Brad's amazing zip code. Okay, that should be an error message, but that would match this if I didn't have the caret starting it and the $ at the end. So just remember, don't get lazy and forget to put the caret and the $. Then if you want to get the results, so exec string is going to return an array with all the substrings that match the parenthesized patterns with 0. So entry 0 matches the entire, is the substring matching the entire pattern. So your parenthesized things start at 1. And finally, if you want to reshuffle things, string dot replace. So this is different. These are for a regular expression object. The replace is defined on a string, and it will do the substitution if you want. Same way as in Perl does substitution, except in Perl it was S, then pattern, then replacement. So this was Perl. Whereas in JavaScript, it looks like that. This is the pattern, and then the string is the replacement. The pattern is a regular expression, so the pattern is a regular expression. The replacement is just a string, so it's a little bit inconsistent, but that's the way it goes. Okay, I, in fact, pretty much never use replace in JavaScript, but it is there. So the 3 main functionalities that you have in Perl: testing a regular expression, capturing content, and replacing content. Those 3 functions all available in JavaScript. Okay, so you'll probably need to use this in your homework. You also can, just as a side note, it looks funky, but it works. You could say if caret \d 5 $ dot test string, that works. So this creates the object, and then the dot says with the object just created, call the test method. And that's fine if you do that in the homework. I have no problem with it. Okay? Questions? Okay, if not, and you have your laptop here and would like to get 20 extra points, or if you'd just like to help me out, which I'd also appreciate a lot, there is on Blackboard under quizzes new EECS web page, and you can see here the link to it. And so this is what we hope to have the new EECS webpage look like. So if you could just take 10 minutes, it's a 2-question survey. What do you like about the page? What do you dislike about the page? Okay, so if you could just take 10 minutes, I'll give you 20 extra credit points on the homework to whoever does it. If you don't have a laptop here, don't worry, you can still fill it out until tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. And like I said, if you could just take a look at it, see if it seems to meet your needs. If you don't, tell me what else needs to be added. Okay? And believe me, I know it doesn't work well on a mobile device. You don't need to tell me that. It's very expensive, actually, to get stuff to work well on mobile devices. So, everyone find that link? Excellent. You can leave when you're done.